To begin. Good morning, everyone. Normally, I go through what feels like a redundant process of introducing myself, but at least this morning, it's very necessary. I am Nicholas Demontia. I'm head of the Department of Architecture here at MIT, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our in-person open house for admitted and waitlisted students. We love you all. We're just not very big. So just so I can understand who I'm talking to, who is here for as a potential SMArchS student? Hey, welcome. Who is here as a potential SMArchS or SMBT student? We look wonderful. And many folks raising their online, we hope. And then any PhD admits here? All right. Well, you're all very welcome. So I want to preview for you the continuum of the day and tell you a little bit about the department. I think what I've learned since I've come to MIT, so a bit about myself. I've been at MIT for 5 years. I spent my career before that mostly in California. And everything is better here except for the weather. And the open house, which I've gotten to know first as an online event during COVID, and then more wonderfully and recently as a in-person event over the last couple of years, is a really crucial part of this community. And one crucial feature of the open house is that it starts with me as the department head, and then other faculty telling you our version of reality. But a very special thing about the MIT open house is over the course of the day, it's a sort of continuum, and you are more and more directly in touch with and really just hanging out with our current students. And they are, of course, our best ambassadors, and they're the ones who are going to really tell you what's going on and what it's like to be a student in the department. And one of the things, many things that I'm very proud of about this academic community is that we know enough and trust our community enough just to get out of the way and let you really spend the day with our current community of students and really understand transparently what their actual experience is, because we have faith and trust that that is actually the best way, first of all, to help you understand what it's really like to be a student here, and then it actually turns out to be the best way to get people to actually come here, because this is a community in which every member is important, particularly including our students, but also our staff, like the staff that are helping here today, as well as of course, our faculty. And this is not a perfect community, but it is a really strong and thriving community, and one that we're very proud of. So again, welcome to this community today, and we're very, very glad you're here. You know, I usually have a slightly more produced presentation with slides, with lots of amazing work, but you'll already see lots of amazing work today without me showing it to you first thing in the morning. I go through the history of the department, which I'll speak to briefly. I go through some of the work that our faculty are doing now, and I go through some of the initiatives in the department. I'm going to speak today a little bit more extemporaneously because this is not an ordinary time. What our country is going through now, related to both the university and to the larger tradition that we have here of welcoming students from all over the world. Neither of these things are things that we take fully for granted, and both of them are currently under attack in various different ways. And so in speaking about the history of the department, I can't separate myself from really addressing where we all are and where you might be thinking about the world, and trying to put this place into that context. And so with that, I'll step back and I'll say that I usually, and I think in this particular case, it's particularly important to talk about what it means to be here in MIT architecture in the context of architecture. The story of MIT architecture in its longest history could be summarized as the history of two very important buildings that I'm about to tell you about. The first building is the very first Rogers building. you're in a version of the Rogers Building, but there was another Rogers Building before the Rogers Building, and the Rogers Building was built in the Back Bay of the city of Boston, and it was in the 19th century, and it was the first home of MIT and the first home of MIT architecture. Tells you a lot about the MIT architecture, that it was present from the very beginning of MIT. In MIT parlance, we're course 4. If you don't know what that means already, you will. It means we're the 4th course. It means we were the last added, though, and we were added at the last minute when the great and the good who were forming MIT were convinced that a Department of Architecture would be an important addition to synthesize questions of design and making across the whole institute, which is a function we still very much serve. At the inception, the architecture department was put in the attic of that building. So again, that tells you a little bit, something of the history as well. And architecture remained in that building actually all the way until 1937, even though MIT as a whole moved here across to this grand home on the Cambridge side of the river in 1916. Architecture, with its practical and professional focus, was deemed more appropriate to be kept in the city of Boston, at least until what is now Building 7 was built and we moved in over here. This is an important part of our history. MIT architecture is the oldest professional school of architecture in North America and played a crucial role in bringing academic training in architecture and professional training in architecture out of the apprentice system and into an academic context, bringing with it conventions like the study of plaster casts from the Beaux-Arts. I'm pointing over here because if you go through this hallway over here, there's a frieze of the Parthenon marbles that was that was actually brought here physically from the Rogers Building and represents an important part of our history. And it will actually move with us to a new building across the street in the Metropolitan Storage Warehouse that you hear a lot more about over the course of today as a kind of indication of the history. So if you're keeping count, that's Building 1. Building 2 is a very different kind of building, and it relates to what makes MIT so remarkable, what makes this department so remarkable, and what is also really important to think about and defend in our current moment. That building is a building called Building 20. You'll note that many buildings at MIT are numbered. Recently, some are named after donors, but it used to be that the only way that you could get a building named after yourself at MIT is if you named your child 13. So the tradition at MIT as an engineering school was to number buildings, and Building 20 was a building built in the early 1940s for an enormous effort which was centered at MIT to develop radar, which was actually invented in Great Britain, but one tiny radar device was brought here to MIT, and then like a seed in a garden, it flowered to produce a huge amount of infrastructure that went all the way along Vassar Street and encompassed many temporary buildings. One of these was Building 20, which was designed to last for 5 years for the duration of the war and was torn down right on schedule in 1997. And in between 1945 and 1997, it played home to what we really can think of as the birth of the modern research university. So the mechanism set up at the end of the Second World War by people like Vannevar Bush, president of MIT, former president of MIT, head of the National Research Defense Council during the Second World War, was a system whereby there was a deep linkage between government, industry, and academic institutions like MIT to advance not only practical research like radar, but actually the underlying basic research would lead to more and more discoveries and inventions over time, including, for example, here at MIT, inventions very relevant to the design professions, like the very first CAD program invented by Evan Sutherland here at MIT, or the very first CNC machine also invented here at MIT. And so what these two buildings give you, the Rogers Building and Building 20, is a story whereby MIT exists in both traditions, and in a way the department occupies both buildings, and not their physical overlap, because they never physically overlapped, but their conceptual overlap, this overlap of a long and really important professional tradition of architectural training, and this tradition of a kind of skunkworks of research and innovation. And the reason why Building 20 was so innovative was that nobody took it really seriously. Everyone just drilled a hole in the wall when they needed a hole in the wall, broke down a door when they needed a door broken down. And it was a very kind of adaptive, innovative approach to design, which they attempted to embody in the Frank Gehry building that replaced it. And you can go today and be the judge of whether that actually happened or not. So this tradition of the research university in design overlaps nowhere more strongly and more importantly than MIT. And as I say, it has been sustained by a kind of fundamental investment of our society in free and open inquiry and universities and research that we take very seriously. And it's also, particularly in the last 40 or 50 years, been enormously strengthened by our ability, both financially and culturally, to accept and welcome students, no matter what their resources, from every country in the world. And these two things together are the fundamental identity of this department. And as you can see, this is why we are concerned today. And this is also why we feel like the work we do here is ever more important and ever more urgent at this particular time. Because the not only is important to model for our whole society a process of open inquiry and a process of welcome, but the tasks we face at the intersection of design and research in the built environment are more urgent than ever. So a couple of things that are going on in the department is, and across MIT, is first of all, of course, a focus, huge focus on climate and the climate crisis. 40% of greenhouse gases are produced by either the construction or operation of buildings. And, you know, if you go into the design of roads and cities and things like that, you can get ever more higher numbers. But the built environment is both at the intersection of the creation of a crisis in the on the surface of the earth that we're facing, and also is at the front lines of that crisis in terms of the effects of extreme weather, other kinds of and the inequities that follow from this from the organization of the world along its lines. And so from design to history and theory to research in computation to research in building technology, all of our faculty are focused increasingly around the issue of climate. In fact, our climate work will be featured in a exhibition curated by myself, Anna Moyachki, and a recently graduated student, Calvin Zhang, at the Venice Architecture Biennale, opening in just 4 or 5 weeks. If you've been here about a month ago, you would have seen a giant stack of crates all the way down that hallway on their way to that exhibit. And we'll bring that work back here and share it with you when you arrive as new students in the fall as well. So this task of thinking about climate is a really important one in the department. A task of thinking about who and how we welcome everyone is a really important task in the department, both thinking about our continued financial support of our students, thinking about outreach to many different diverse communities, thinking about our own department's history. This department graduated the first African-American architect in the United States, Robert Taylor, who went on to found the Tuskegee School of Architecture. We've started working closely with Tuskegee over the course of the last 5 years, and that relationship will be part of your time here at MIT. And then I guess the very last landmark to note in the department is really thinking about design as a force for creative thinking and making across many disciplines other than architecture. This goes back to where and how architecture was first included in MIT's then list of only 4 departments back in the 1860s. And today it's something that we advance in the department through our own undergraduate design major and minor, which many of you will have a chance to teach in or participate in, and also through our partnership with the new Morningside Academy for Design, which is our co-tenant with the Department of Urban Studies and Planning in the new Metropolitan Warehouse, which you'll have a chance to think and learn about more today. So I hope I've put the department in some kind of context. This morning, we have about, 10 more minutes in this session before we take a break. And so I'd like you to all do one thing for me to open this next part, which is like every single person in this room to raise your hand. Can you all do that for me? Everyone raise their hand, please. Okay, good. You can put them down now. So now I know you can raise your hand and ask a question, and you've done it once. And so if you'd like to ask a question, please do so again. No question is unwelcome or too straightforward or off the wall to ask.
I have a microphone here to pass so that people online can also hear your questions.
Close to the microphone would be appreciated.
Oh, so I need to be a little closer to the microphone. Okay, got it. There is this thing you learn in teaching, which is if you let an awkward silence go on long enough, someone will ask a question just for it to stop. So we're going to try that as an experiment. Yeah. I can. I think. Are you a prospective student? No. So the department. One thing you may hear about today is something called a discipline group, which you've never heard of, probably never heard before in your life as a phrase, but will if you come to MIT. There's always a difference between a kind of internal culture to a place and external culture, and how we present ourselves to the world. To the world, we are MIT architecture, and internally we collaborate in crucial and central ways across every part of the department. But because of the unique nature of architecture as a discipline, one of the things that makes it most amazing to study, we're also a kind of scale model of the university, which is to say that in this department you have faculty who are trained as engineers, you have faculty who are trained as historians, as art historians, as architectural historians, you have faculty that are trained as professional designers, you have faculty who are trained in computer science. And so one of the unique kind of registers of this focus on research, which I was talking about, is that these faculty, each from diverse intellectual traditions within the field of architecture, have historically in this department hung out together. And developed modes of thinking and discourse that are essential to that core intradisciplinary conversation inside the discipline. And they also collaborate outside those groups as well. But because we're MIT and we like to organize everything, those groups have names. They're called discipline groups. We have many of them in the department. Building technology. Historically, the group in history, theory, and criticism was the first. It formed about 50 years ago officially. There'll be a big celebration in the fall of that. And then a group in building technology formed about 40 years ago. A group in design and computation formed about 30 years ago. The Aga Khan program in Islamic architecture was formed in, I guess that would be about 45 years ago. And so these groups kind of thread their way in their history through the department. They're not fortresses. They're more like different parts of a garden where you can go to and experience different phenomena and different ways of thinking. And if you're in the SMArchS program, which most of you are, all of those groups contribute in different ways to your curriculum and education. And the SMArchS program is kind of the, I'm mixing metaphors here, but it's sort of the public plaza in which everyone comes out of the houses and participates together in a kind of crucial public life of the department.
Question from online. When will the department move to the new building?
Pardon?
When will the department move to the new building?
One of the, I mean, in a way, having an active building site as part of the department is super exciting, and I'll be sorry to lose the active building site as a resource, but I will be glad to get it done with and actually move in as well. So the building site is now active, and depending as how many of you have actually worked in an architect's office who are coming into the SMArchS program? Okay. So if you've worked in an architect's office, that building schedules are not super precise. And so but basically, if everything goes well, And according to plan, a little ahead of schedule, we'll move in the summer of 2026. So 1 year from this summer. And if everything goes, if schedules slip a little bit, which they sometimes do, we'll move in January of 2027. And if things go disastrously, which I'm sure they won't, it'll be the summer after that. But I'm my fingers are crossed for summer 2026. Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm curious if the School of Architecture is in collaboration with any other institution in America or outside of America, in Europe, Asia.
Well, so yes, many is the is the answer to your question. We have a few. I think we have only a few formal collaborations. Again, we're a small community, less than 200 students, about 40 faculty, and we can't sustain massive levels of institutional collaboration. And so where we do have formal collaborations, they are tend to be fairly well considered and represent important parts of our identity. So I would talk about two. One is something called the Robert Taylor Project, which is our collaboration with Tuskegee that represents a really important way of thinking about our history. History of Robert Taylor, who graduated in 1892, went and built 48 buildings on the Tuskegee campus, 40 of which still survive. Our students have been going back and forth with Tuskegee students for the last 5 years, learning about things like historic preservation. Tuskegee students coming here, studying digital fabrication, entrepreneurship. That's a kind of crucial partnership. The students who've gone from MIT down to Tuskegee have all told us it's been actually one of the most important parts of their experience here at MIT. Another exchange program we have is with the ETH in Zurich that represents a very different part of identity. The ETH is a kind of a parallel institution in terms of the depth and quality of its research, particularly in building technology and construction. And so that's actually technically an undergraduate exchange program. So our a couple of undergrad students go to the ETH, and ETH students come here, but they end up in graduate studios because of their where they are in their training. So I would say those are like two very different examples of the kinds of relationships we have. MIT also has I don't even know what it stands for. Everything at MIT is in acronyms, which is this like consequence of this kind of military industrial tradition. So there's something called MISTI, which is the international something. One of the I's is definitely stands for international, but MISTI is a kind of consortium of MIT alumni and institutions with relationships to MIT across the world. So again, MIT is good at organizing things. So instead of lots of different foreign programs, there's this one umbrella organization called MISTI, and there's MISTI France, there's MISTI Belgium, there's MISTI Australia, and when you're a student, many of our students have taken advantage of this as part of their graduate education. You can get, for example, a funded internship. So MISTI will fund an internship for you in France or Australia or anywhere you might want to go where where they have an established organization, which is many countries in the world, and the hosting architect just has to give you interesting things to do. So there are these kinds of things around MIT that are, again, MIT is a small institution. There's 1,000 faculty at MIT as a whole, and this is enormously beneficial in terms of the scale and intimacy at which our students are able to make interdisciplinary connections across, especially towards the later time of their MArch or directly in research degrees. And so these kinds of connections, everything at MIT tends to be a little bit more one-on-one and one-off than at a larger institution, but that doesn't mean there are not an abundance of opportunities. In fact, most of our students get, quite freaked out when they get here by the all the different things they can do and might be missing out on. And then by the time they're about to graduate, they're also, worried that they've only done 752 things and there are 1,584 things they could do in this enormously rich garden of opportunities that MIT represents.
Oh, all right. I think we have one last question here.
Thank you. I'm wondering how you expect the program to change with the move in terms of how the space will affect.
Well, architecture matters, right? So, and one of the, it matters in ways that we can predict, and it matters in ways that we can't predict. So I'm going to answer that question in two ways. One, the things that we can predict about the change, we will be all together and all visible to each other. Today, as you go around different parts of the department, you'll be led through different hallways of this amazing main, this is also called the Rogers Building, but this amazing main group of MIT with all the different interconnected numbered buildings, which is an amazing architectural experience, but it means you're always encountering the architecture department, behind this door or hidden in this bit. We sort of have a collection of spaces around the dome here, but they represent the sort of tip of the iceberg in terms of all the different things we do. So I think having all those things together and visible to each other will only increase the sense of community and the sense of engagement and collaboration across the department. We'll also be cohabiting with our colleagues in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, which, like us, is the kind of strongest and oldest department of its type in the country. And there's a lot of really interesting people and examples of thinking about cities and the built environment from DUS that I think we'll learn from more naturally, even though they're now only in the building next door. But architecture matters. In the building next door, you'll see Building 9. The architect Walter Netsch convinced MIT that they could fit in 4 floors instead of 3 floors into the same space, and therefore the floors don't connect. And that something like that makes a big difference in terms of how we actually relate to each other. And then all the ways in which I cannot predict. I think we, you will be part of a very exciting and important generation of students who get to decide and establish what the culture of that building is. There is something that's going to happen every year as a tradition in that building, which you're going to invent. Right? It hasn't happened yet. We don't know what it is. It's going to be something that happens one evening. It's going to be something that happens on the solstice. Who knows? And so the chance to kind of inhabit and make, make a place out of a space, to put it in more theoretical terms, is a very rich one, and one that we will actually all encounter together over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Nicholas. I think it's time
Thanks.
for us to move on.
Yeah. We'll see you all over the course of the day, and we'll take a 5-minute break while we set up for the next panel.
There's any way to throw that sound out there, because we're recording the meeting in the back. Unless you play the meeting, you play the audio from that computer. Okay. That would be one way to do it. You want to send me the link? And I'll throw it up back there. It's the only way to do it. Play the video from that back? That's what I'm suggesting, because then it will be up on the screen. You'll be able to hear the audio. Yeah. If you just look up space architecture for video on YouTube. Yeah. Okay.
What's that?
Space.
Great. Thank you for your patience. Welcome, everyone. Great to see you all. I'm Liam O'Brien Jr. I'm the director of the SMArchS program. Along with all of my colleagues here, we've had such great pleasure looking at your work. We looked at something close to 700 applicants for the class of 21. So congratulations on being here. We're thrilled to get to know you today. So what we have planned for you, we want to show you a kind of overview of our curriculum, and then I've invited key faculty who you'll engage throughout your time during the program. And then hopefully at the end, maybe despite our late start, we'll have a bit of time for questions. If we don't get to a big question and answer session today, we also have the lunch and the afternoon and the evening, so plenty of time to ask any questions. So just to give an overview piggybacking off of Nicholas's intro, you might have seen this in your research about our program. This is our SMArchS curriculum that has been around for several years. There are new versions now that start to give a sense for how the discipline groups, which Nicholas mentioned because of my question, how the discipline groups interlace throughout the curriculum. So during your 3.5 years here, you're likely to encounter some version of this curriculum. And I just wanted to highlight a few aspects of the curriculum in advance of getting into more depth with each of the key courses that you'll encounter along the way. So it could be said that our curriculum is thought about in really 3 chunks. The first chunk is what we call our core sequence, and this is 3 semesters, which is distinct from a lot of other programs. A lot of other programs are 4, but we've taken great care to try to really reduce the number of core studios and really concentrate a lot of the pedagogical intent into these 3 semesters. There's also a lot of thought and care that's gone into the first semester, the one on the far left, which is thinks a lot about orientation and how to acclimate you when you arrive. We're really keen to have the 21 incoming SMArchS really do two things. On the one hand, contribute to the cohort culture. On the other hand, really looking to help you identify what is your unique approach to architecture and how can we start to cultivate that even at a really early stage, for instance, in the first semester. So we have faculty colleagues here who will talk about two of the three of the other courses, and I happen to coordinate Core 1 Studio, so I'll share a little bit about that. Then we have folks up on the panel who will speak to Core 2 and Core 3, then we'll talk about options, and then finally Thesis. The second chunk is after you've kind of moved your way through the fundamental courses of Studio, there are 3 option studios. And so we love the idea that there's a kind of balance between the number of core studios and the number of option studios. The thinking is that during these 3 semesters, you're really kind of trying on the intellectual projects of various practitioners or thinkers in the field. We generally have a mixture of folks who are teaching internal faculty who are part of the program, and we also invite external instructors as well. So the option studios are really a chance for students to start to navigate on their own, of course, with guidance from advisors, but really beginning to try on value sets that are aligned with their own. And of course, during this time, as you can read, if it's not too small for you, electives are really important during these 3 semesters. And those electives hopefully are preparing you to think about your own contribution to the discipline in what we're calling an architectural thesis. So you'll notice that there's a kind of tapering of coursework that happens toward the end of the curriculum. That's for a number of reasons, one of which is we want you focusing on your thesis with as much clarity as possible. But also in the department, we think a lot about the role of teaching assistantships and research assistantships. And so there's dedicated time for those of you who are interested in an academic path to take up teaching assistantships during the end of the program. As Nicholas mentioned, in this idea of simultaneity, we think about our program in a kind of a sort of simultaneity. On the one hand, we are a professional program. On the other hand, we are also able to sort of pick from this myriad of amazing electives that are happening within our department and also outside of our department. And so this balance of being a professional program, but at the same time doing everything we can to make new kinds of architects through the fact that we are a research university is one thing that we're really focused on. So I'll speak just a little bit more before hearing from our colleagues, just to say a touch about Core 1. So Core 1 is comprised of, well, you'll see there's going to be an additional riddle this year, so this is somewhat misleading. We actually have 4 riddles coming up for you. But the hope is that we're spanning from things like figures to objects to rooms and to buildings, all the while thinking about an increased complexity of context, all the while thinking about how we can sort of increase the number of and type of modes of representation that you're familiar with. So just to give you a little preview, the first one that you'll encounter is design a stair to there and a stair to nowhere. And this is really about offering students with or without a background a way into a riddle. The riddle is important for us because it's really the sort of most primary or fundamental way that students are starting to develop their own agenda. Because of the way that you're interpreting the riddle, because of the terms that you're ascribing to that riddle, that becomes those same terms that you're using to create. And so this for us is an important beginning of a kind of design authorship or a design identity that we hope you'll cultivate throughout the core and to the option and of course into the thesis. And then we graduate to a room. Actually, it takes place in this very room, which is an important room as you'll find to the department. A lot of events happen here, social, design oriented, a lot of tradition happens here. And so how can we think about designing a room for one, for some, and for all? And then finally, an opportunity to think about the history of the program. How do we archive our program as we move across the street to the Metropolitan Warehouse? And this is, again, on the one hand, about producing an object that is has its own identity in its own right, but of course, how does it graft onto and sort of speak the language of MIT as well? So a lot of hybrid thinking, a lot of thinking about the object and how it relates to context in this. And we take play very, very seriously in the studio as well. So I'm going to hand the microphone and the clicker to Anna Miljacki, who's going to talk a bit about.
This
No,
is
it's
Cultures of
actually going to be Jay.
Oh, all right. Hi, everyone. I'm JG. So I teach a course called Cultures of Form, which is really, I think in many ways, kind of a sister course to what you teach, Anna, which we'll talk about in a minute on positions. But Cultures of Form is sort of a series of immersions within a range of cultures, both within and without the normative bounds of architectural disciplinary discourse that might produce, inflect, materialize, and systematize architectural form and its construction. So in other words, we sort of explore a series of origins and reciprocities in form between conceptualization and realization. The course is project-based, one of which you're looking up at the screen right now, and it's anchored by a weekly act of making. And so we sort of start the course by immersing you in a few different lenses of what we might call formal cultures. So in exploring disciplinary and historically important cultures of form and architecture, we will investigate topics like geometry and its optimization, rationalization, modularization, and underlying metrics of curvature, particularly in relation to constructive efficiencies. So as part of that, we'll look at the construction of lines, splines, surfaces, and masses, and review canonical examples of their construction and disciplinary dilemmas and solutions that arise through case studies and historical precedents. But these techniques of form are accompanied by a survey of frames or types of formal theory that might bridge between, we might call it the tool, the culture, and the analysis. And so we'll dive for a moment into affect theory with readings from authors like Xiang Ngai, who writes on aesthetic categories and their construction in culture, and understand them alongside critical writings on architectural representation and spatial analysis provided by authors like Robin Evans. And finally, we'll end with a select review of non-Western visual cultures. So looking, for instance, at the construction of exodometrics vis-a-vis narrative, time, and subject in East Asian landscape scrolls, which differs pretty significantly from traditions of the construction of image and how time itself and how sort of the moment in time and the figure is represented narratively across that picture plane. And then we'll sort of dive then into what I call material cultures, which will cycle through a series of materializations, and we'll look at typologies of stacks, sticks, casts, masses, and excavations across a range of geographic and temporal contexts. And we'll begin with what might be more normatively familiar as formats of contemporary design and construction, but extend to analog, craft-driven, non-Western, and non-industrial modes of making also. And we'll sort of be taking these through a series of material studies in steel, plaster, wood, wire, fabric, and other materials. And finally, the semester is capped with a sort of exploration of interfaces between identity and any one of these sort of cultures of form or making that you've sort of been immersed in and developing a position hopefully towards. So each of you will develop an individual constructive, formal, or material project through an iterative object series that establishes and explicates a set of values in form and making. So up here on the screen, you see some examples of really beautiful student work. You know, on the top left, Carolyn was exploring extreme modularity. It's a single panel that produces that sort of astounding form. Tristan to the right was interested in iterative soap casting. Mara over there was interested in this incredibly measured study of wood grain and sort of like exquisite woodcraft, really. And Pearl, sort of like on that bottom, that image that we started with, knit together cut steel. So hopefully it's a very fun sort of course in which you're getting situated in tools, but also frames of analysis, and begin to establish a set of values towards how you want to operate in the physical world.
Okay, let's forward it so I see where we begin. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Miljacki. I'm a historian, theorist, and a curator who is embedded in architectural and urban design in this department. I'm currently also the SMArchS director and SMArchS AD director. So for those of you who are SMArchS and are staying in the room, I'll be talking about that in a very different way than I talk here. But here in the SMArchS program, I just got back from a studio trip to Serbia yesterday. So hopefully I can tell you what this other thing is about. Positions is our first history theory class. And it's taught from within the discipline group of architecture and design so that we can situate everyone in the context of contemporary discourse, which is a little bit different than the way every other history theory class will be in the following semesters. But here basically, and this is a moment where we are collaborating directly with the studio, actually having a session in studio and with studio faculty somewhere towards the end of the semester when students have been already gathering all kinds of knowledge together. The point of positions really is to set us in the context of contemporary discourse and its key urgencies. The class transforms a little bit every year to account for some of the new writing and new thoughts that are happening in the world, as well as the historical events that are unfolding around us. So we're trying to figure out how to situate ourselves vis-a-vis the discipline and the moment that we inhabit together. It is some of the readings that we go through and projects that we see might be understood by some as canonical, but that's not the point. The point is actually that there is no canonical knowledge that you walk away with from this class in a sense. We're not testing you on the knowledge that you gather. The key is that we are discussing things together in the context of the classroom. It involves reading about 50 pages every week. I try to give you that. That seems like a lot at the beginning, but actually it ends up being less than some other semesters. You have to write every week in a forum kind of context with each other. And this is the whole class sitting around a table. So even though it is in fact a kind of a lecture class where there are a few things that we do need to agree on by the end of it, actually the conversation itself is the most important experience about it. The final project, and this is an image of the final presentation. The final project is a visual dossier on a topic that you define in teams that just has to fit the topics or the kind of the litmus test of the critical thinking that we have been employing throughout the semester. And we present it sometimes. It takes the form of games. For example, here, Cards Against Sustainability, and you know how that works. Or another one, an attempt to organize and think about what are the archetypes of roles that we take on, how your answers, this was an online kind of interface, how your answers might set you in a particular category of or a role. An old project, here you're seeing here a beta version of Highlineopoly. So a few years ago, a group of students took on the Highline and the gentrification around Highline as a critical project, as a topic of their study. And that eventually would become part of a game that my lab, the Critical Broadcasting Lab, would produce for an exhibition. Here you're seeing a game called Tort, in which students were looking at laws, sites, and various ways of stopping architecture from being built in a particular context. So it was a bit of a kind of judge, or let's say a trial situation where someone had to say whether or not your argument was good enough given the law you were looking at to stop architecture. Here's Highlineopoly when we developed it finally into a game that's a absolutely highly playable game. with all actual information surrounding the Highline. So the information about costs of building, costs of rent is true. They're organized around a kind of an abstracted Highline. All of the money is Architect money. Let me see what else. We included here questions about air rights and Architect facades, some things that that Monopoly doesn't have, but you're obviously recognizing it's a Monopoly game. So there are certain things that you get to kind of understand through playing this game, and certainly you get to discuss these topics playing this game. So this game and a few others were included in an exhibition here at the Keller Gallery Playroom. That opened just before the pandemic and then closed just before the pandemic. The idea was that we would travel the exhibit. That's how we produced it. It's still sitting in my office, so if you know a place, let me know. But it included a number of other games, including one about prep schools in mostly in Asia that our students were interested in discussing. It included a game about types of information that we sanitize architecture from, as well as information that's there. So in each case, we play the game for one of the days of during our happy hour here at MIT, instigating thus a school-wide conversation around those. So that's all I can say about, I mean, I'm happy to talk more about any of this in some aftermath event of this.
Okay, thanks. I'm Rafi Siegel. I coordinate Core 2. And as you saw before, really Design Studio is a kind of like a spine in the program. And the Core Studios really establish a kind of foundation in a way that you carry on and become more confident and more independent into Thesis. So after the Core 1 riddles, or let's say working on certain elements and components, Core 2 begins to compile that knowledge and that experience into making a single building, into developing a single design for a building, which is an object of itself, but at the same time engages with its surrounding and context, whether social, urban, environmental, political, economic, etc. And so the two components that are added, one is program as a discursive idea, as something that we invent in a way and can be critical of, but also be very creative with. And the other is beginning to look at the urban context and use urban analysis to inform design decisions. So the topics for the Core 2 studio, as of whether it's historically has been a library or a theater, this year we are looking at what we're calling an interfaith chapel or a common house. It's a broad type, let's say, or one that could be further developed, criticized, but also kind of explored. And through that, we have a series of studies, let's say, that all work towards developing that single project. The emphasis through the chapel architecturally here is about light and material. So obviously looking back at a rich history of chapels and translating these lessons through the making of models, of what we call sectional models, as a first exercise. And then moving on to developing ideas on program and what would it mean to have such a program in the context of MIT, or let's say the edges of campus. So if the earlier Core 1 kind of was more internal, we can say, here we begin to kind of go beyond campus with a program that's very social and has a lot of kind of meaning. So we're identifying different sites along the campus, between the campus and the city. And then in addition, introducing ideas of recycling and upcycling as a kind of sustainability component in the material kind of implications and development of the project. Right. Back to you.
To me. Uh, Yolande, Adam, and I also lead Core 3, and Yolande coordinates, but couldn't be here right now. But I'm very excited to talk to you about Core 3, which is, as Liam said, the concluding studio of the core program. And I would say in particular, what might be very unique about it is its integration, close integration with our building technology program, which is a really rare opportunity given by sort of the structure of our department, where you can be put in direct contact with a series of stakeholders and experts that help you bring a building to really a full level of not just tectonic and structural resolution, but in dialogue with communities, with environments, with different kinds of ideas of inhabitation and different cycles of time. So really the approach of the studio encourages these kind of the study of reciprocal relationships between living organisms and habitats and ecosystems, both natural and constructed, that nurture them. And maybe in more plain words, I'll say the studio is focused on the program of community-supported agriculture. So the framework encourages these kind of design explorations that advance an integrated approach towards buildings and the environment, and hopefully provide the opportunity to envision these more reciprocal and regenerative food, atmospheric, and constructive systems in which local community members grow and share food while practicing building practices of care and stewardship as well. So the course really consists of a single semester long building project grounded in this integrated understanding of material, spatial, structural, and environmental performances in response to a regional site, climate, and set of social conditions. So we start by looking at historic, regional, and vernacular examples of this form of reciprocity, sort of through forms of food storage that might be familiar to some of you, through their thermal and temporal management of these cycles between food, plants, and communities in patterns of production, harvest, and consumption. And alongside this, we'll also dive deeply into the technical description of the performative wall section. So looking at a range of precedents and studies through a construction systems handbook, which we have created for you so that you can sort of have all this information at your fingertips. And so I also want to emphasize that, you will be in contact with all these forms of expertise, but all of them will be packaged to very directly be absorbed by you. And so you don't have to worry about sort of going out and sort of mastering something. It'll be in this kind of very direct contact with each of these experts. So in the handbook, we'll look at best practices, detailing and case studies in a range of construction systems that'll include things like mass timber, earth-based systems, such as rammed earth, lightwood framing, multicellular polycarbonates, and I want to emphasize also alongside what we typically consider forms of expertise, I'd like to draw attention to this as a form of expertise as well, which is kind of direct contact with communities and sort of those who are actively practicing agriculture, actively practicing sort of in their communities. So we'll be engaged in a series of conversations and site visits with community-based agriculture groups. So Eastie Farms, based in Boston, very locally here. And we'll also do some field trips typically. Last year, we also went to upstate New York. We went to Stone Barns and sort of had a conversation with not just farmers, but sort of the entire community that was involved in the consumption and the sort of like further lifetimes of that sort of ecosystem. And I'll just end by saying Core 3 is a tactile, multidisciplinary, and hands-on studio that attempts to be comprehensive and integrated in every sense of the word. And hopefully it's just a really good time because we do build a lot of really excellent like full-scale prototypes, material studies, we go to sites. So I think you gain a kind of mastery, hopefully through the course of this studio, but also have a kind of complete contact with the matter of architecture itself.
Liam, am I up or is it Sky? Yeah. Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Sheila Kennedy. I'm a professor of architecture. And I will be talking about the option studios. And as Liam mentioned, the option studios are really a moment where you all will continue your research and thinking about who you are as an architect through entering into a series of design problems. And just 2 years ago, it seems like it was a long time ago, but we gathered in this room, myself, my colleague Caitlin Mueller, and others who are working around issues of climate and climate crisis in various different ways to launch the Spoon Climate Studios, which is a new program at MIT. And Caitlin and I are teaching that, and we're calling it Odds and Mods. Mods because material circularity has a lot to do with the dimensional standard modular materials that we typically work with, that typically form our inherited palette of materials in architecture. And we need to deal with waste streams from those materials. And odds, of course, are natural, irregular, and varying materials that we really did not have the tools to design with effectively until very recently with the advent of computation. So the studio last year was all about brick. This year it is all about wood. And basically we're asking this question: what would wood building be if we built with all parts of the tree, not just the trunk, not just 2x4s and dimensional lumber? So we have a great team. It's very typical for Odds and Mods and for this option studio to integrate across SMArchS and Masters of Architecture. We have a workshop that's associated. Myself and my colleague Caitlin Mueller co-teach this. So basically the premise of this studio, and I'll be brief, is that we are at an inflection point as expressed in the Pyrocene, a moment where the biomass, which is that green brick that you see there on the screen, and the technomass, which is all of the gray brick, are at an inflection point, a tipping point where really we are we have a very vulnerable position with our biomass, and there are gigatons of dry material in our forests that need to be removed, wood that needs to be thinned out to allow for forest health, or these forests are going to burn. So one of the questions that we're asking ourselves is why do we not work more massively with trees, with whole trees? Why can't we read a tree and see what we want in it of architecture in the way that people in the 18th century did when they were building ships, in the way that indigenous people did when they were harvesting trees for their canoe and transportation technologies? Why are we chopping this up, rearranging the fibers, and actually making the tree far less strong structurally? My colleague Caitlin has developed a number of computational tools where we can use very subaltern tree members in terms of the conventional wood industry, forks, tree forks and so forth, structurally, as you can see here. And we also are working, in addition to that wild wood, with all of the waste from dimensional lumber and cross-laminated timber. So Rachel Blows, who's a SMArchS BT student, also working in computation, has developed a number of digital tools that students use that allow for the tailoring of different pieces of waste, which you can see there on the left, and the kind of positioning of those into what we call messy mass timber. We have a lot of fun in the studio. I don't know if we're marketing geniuses calling it messy mass timber, but how to actually explore a heterogeneous aesthetic, an aesthetic that isn't the kind of homogeneous, clean aesthetic that we've inherited from modernism. So a big part of our pedagogy is getting outside of MIT. We continue the core 3 idea of moving and learning. We went to a number of sawmills in New Hampshire. You can see here. We began to understand how wood is cut, how people can do things, how we can think about a scale of production from small scale sawyers like Timberdoodle to much larger industrial factories. And at mid-review, students did sourcing for their experimental wood projects. Here you see Junha's work, which was a bird blind for crows. She has the sourcing there on the left. or Jabari here with his wildwood bird blind that you can see on the left presenting with all of the material research around. We just came back from our spring trip. Alex was a member of that, right, Alex? Yes. So you can ask him questions about that. And we went deep into the forest in a U.S. Forest Service research station, Blodgett Forest. And it was really kind of magical to be amongst the trees, but it was also really powerful to see those areas that have been burned out. And we did visit those, and we understood a bit more about the volatility of wood, why it needs to come out, and what we can do with it as architects. And we also sort of launched ourselves into the very perplexing economies of tourism in the Tahoe region, precipitated by the Olympics in the 1960s, where really there's an extreme need for affordable housing. There's tons of wood available for hardened housing that can be fire resistant. And as we went to mills like this one here, sawmills like this, we began to think about this problem. So students did a lot of sketching. This is one of several sites that were recommended that we will take on now for the design of workforce housing across a variety of different scales that students will select. And they will apply the learnings from the first part of the semester to the design of this housing. We also had fun. We stopped at Cult Burger in Tahoe, sketching there, hanging out, but still sketching, as you can see. The students also did quite a bit of work on the trip, extracting the constructive principles. Nermeen here looking at the idea of arraying across a variety of different scales of timber, being kind of very ecumenical in working with all different kinds of curved pieces. Jin working with a branching fork grammar and a do-it-yourself logic for making very lightweight structures that could be portable and suitable for temporary U.S. Forest Service and Wahoo tribal member housing. And also Sam working with this idea of agile stacking, whereby different configurations of structures could be accommodated by trees, avoiding the problems of foundation, which in an area that receives 6 feet of snow can be significant. And the students also spent a good deal of time presenting these ideas in public settings here with this sawmill and Amy Berry, who runs the Tahoe Fund. So working with communities there and presenting their ideas to various different stakeholders. So happy to answer questions about that. You guys will be able to join an odds and mods studio if you so choose. Option studios are elective, and maybe at lunch we can talk more about that. I'll turn it over to Sky now.
I'm Skylar Tibbetts. I sit between the computation group and architecture and urbanism, and I'll talk to you about an option studio called Space Architectures. This was a collaboration between our Department of Architecture, AeroAstro, and the Media Lab, and several faculty. So Nicholas and myself from our department, David Newman and Cody Page from the Media Lab, and Jeff Hoffman from AeroAstro. Last year, we had 35 students, and there were half engineers, half designers. And really, it's about bringing together different disciplines to study space architecture. But one question is, why are we interested in space? Part of it is this. So there's the decommissioning of the space station, and there's a boom in commercial space. But part of it is also just that a number of our current students have already been employed in architecture offices that have space contracts for developing International Space Station or lunar habitats, et cetera. So we're seeing the future of our graduates as this one possibility that they will be hired into the space industry. And there is a boom in this, and they're hiring designers like Philippe Stark got the commission to do the next space station. Prada got the commission to do the next space suit. You know, all the major firms have worked in space in various ways, whether it's lunar habitats or space station. So we think that this is a booming area, and we really need to educate the future architects to be able to explore this. So that's why we're interested in it. But it's also about designing for humans in extreme environments. So currently, space technologies looks like this. This is Skylab. And the space station looks like that. And so, you know, for good reason, the initial space structures and architecture were for survival and extreme environments. But as we're going to spend more and more time there, and maybe commercial space flight and space tourism, or there's going to be more people in space, we need to think about the human. And that's where the architects come in. And that's where we have a really important role. Back at home, MIT has one of the largest number of astronauts, or maybe the largest astronaut outside of the Air Force. So we've 2 or 3 of our students last year were applying to be astronauts. So there is a long history of MIT being at the forefront of space. So MIT architecture should really be at the forefront of space architecture. And I thought this was a good point that Nicholas made, that it's at the edges of the possible where we find important lessons for what we need to do here on Earth. So we should really be pushing the boundaries in extreme environments, whether that's space or extreme environments here on Earth. And that'll then teach us and develop technologies and new design principles for how we work in conventional settings as well. There's 3 phases: a research phase, a material prototyping phase, and then a final prototyping and construction phase. Last year, we went to various sites in Texas. So we went to SpaceX and then NASA's JSC, where we saw mission control, where the Apollo astronauts were, and then the pool where the astronauts train underwater. And we went to Austin to see ICON. And then we just got back last week. We were in Colorado seeing a lot of the booming early companies in the commercial space area. And then can we play the video? So there's a video from last semester that we'll play, and it's a couple minutes, fairly short, but I think it gives you a good vision of what the
space is one of the most hostile environments you can imagine. I've been in space 5 times in orbit around the Earth. I mean, you're sitting inside a spacecraft looking out the window, realizing that on the other side of that window, I'd be dead in a few seconds. And so traditionally, engineers have figured out how to build safe habitats that will keep people alive and functional. But, you know, if you're talking about habitats for a long time, and that's what we're trying to design on the moon, you really want to think about what it's like living in that habitat. And that's what architects are trained to think about. And that's been the real value of this class, is bringing the architecture vision together with the engineering analysis.
What I have in my head is to have 4 minutes to start here.
The Space Architecture Studio brings together architecture, aeroastro, and the Media Lab. And the idea behind this course was really to reimagine what the future of space architecture is. Architects typically are designing for buildings and construction systems on Earth. But given the extremes of climate and the extremes in our environment, we have a lot of situations where traditional construction methods don't work. And so we're pretty used to thinking about, how do we build in an unusual way? How do we build with new techniques, new teams, new assembly methods? And a lot of that can translate to the space environment.
MIT actually has a long history of involvement in space exploration. We were part of the Apollo missions way back when, and there have absolutely been courses on design for space, building technologies for space, but we've never had something quite like this, where we've intentionally brought together these different departments and are thinking very specifically about a design scenario that is becoming very relevant, especially with commercialization of space exploration and going to the moon.
Recently, we've seen a lot of architecture firms or even space architecture programs coming out with new concepts for lunar habitats or future space stations. But one thing that seems different about MIT is how we design and test these systems. I mean, we have engineers and designers coming together, so we can't just do a bunch of renderings and drawings. We need to build these things and put them through their paces and test them underwater in the pool, or drop test them, or inflation test. And then there's a full report that all the engineering and design students have to put together with all the calculations, the modeling, the specifications. You know, this is still early concepts, but we need to understand how these systems are feasible, and we need to be able to physically test them.
Part of what we've tried to do for the students is to bring them up to speed in what the future possibilities are for space exploration. With the 30 years of the space shuttle and now the International Space Station, we've pretty much mastered living and working in near Earth orbit. And it's time to go beyond that. And they've now had the opportunity to really give some thought to what's really involved in living and working on the moon, because that's the next place we're going. And I'm delighted our students have had at least a one semester opportunity to think through this problem and come up with some potential solutions.
Switch back to the Zoom.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and to your families as well. Thank you for joining us here for the open house. My name is Rania Ghosn. I'm an associate professor of architecture and urbanism. I'm co-founder of the practice Design Earth, and here at MIT, I direct the SMArchS urbanism program. So those of you who are joining for that or might be here, I'll see you later.
Mars. I always wonder what it would be like to live there and to build
Yeah,
there.
no. I mean, but if you are in town for a day or two, you might head also to the MIT Museum, where some of that longer history of MIT's engagement with space is put in display, along with some work of Design Earth and an exhibition called Cosmograph. It's definitely worth the museum is definitely worth a visit. So, but just broadly to say that you'll mostly encounter me maybe in the advanced design research seminars. I teach on geodesign, landscapes of energy, questions of climate, World Heritage sites, and most significantly for the purposes of our meeting today, I occasionally teach the thesis prep and coordinate the thesis module, which is a year-long exploration here at MIT. It's kind of I'll start maybe with a kind of some of our shots from the grand finale of that day, which is probably, as far as the staff are concerned, one of our other major events where they pull in together such major logistics. But it's a kind of a glorious day that wraps up your potential educational experience here at MIT. It's after core option studios, you'll have an opportunity to actually hone in and define a modality of your own practice that sits at that intersection between identifying concerns that matter to you and concerns that matter to the world, and developing a research and a design agenda into how these things can come to matter together. So whether that's in relationship to critical discourse, material experimentation, entrepreneurship, collaboration that actually crisscrosses some of what we mentioned on the various discipline groups. So every student typically produces their own individual thesis research projects, although we've had instances of collaborations. You work with a primary faculty member and then a reader who together work with you on your committee, with the possibility of that additional advisor being from other discipline groups at MIT. So if you're honed in on building technology, computation, questions of urbanism, history and theory, these would be potential allies for you on your committee, as well as actually members from beyond our departments as a potential reader as well. A few things that would allow us to do that is, one, kind of the intimacy of the scale of the program allows this one-on-one conversation whereby through electives, seminars, internships, TAs and RAs opportunities, you've had that possibility to hone in onto specific questions. So I've just given you a sense of how these projects might be quite offer a variety in terms of the methods of work, the concerns, the scale and the media outputs. So you'll have a scale of exploration and material exploration that varies from the material prototype to forms of publications, public curation, theatrical performances, construction manuals, and down to design build explorations. So maybe I'll just give you a sense of one of maybe I'll want to share with you 3 of these projects. Actually, this is kind of very quickly our graduating class, some of whom are still around as part of the teaching fellowship. Liam would tell you a bit about this book and strategy. So as we welcome you, we also make sure that by the time you've wrapped up, you have the possibility for some of you to be engaged in teaching and research opportunities in your last semesters and beyond. So this starts, as I said, it's a 1-year kind of process that starts with a bit of a discomfort zone around this thesis prep moment, where you're probably asking yourself, okay, all of this is great, but how do I really figure out what my thesis would be? And it's kind of a semester-long conversation amongst the cohort with the thesis prep coordinator, as well as with various faculty and recent alum voices, of actually figuring out what that question might be, how you would go methodologically exploring it, testing a few explorations. Kind of, it's a bit of a bouncy ride. We hope that by doing it a few times, we eventually land land in a better place, but there's always a few safety nets. And so it's a research dossier that allows you to apply for one of the many research travel opportunities or internships opportunities. So you can kind of hone in on that question and then pursue your thesis project. So probably you've had the chance to see one of these booklets. If not, I'm sure Kateri or Tessa would be happy to share that with some of you. So it's our recent graduating class who just completed this fall. A series of fantastic work, actually, but I just wanted to highlight maybe 3 projects to give you a sense of the what I just mentioned, the variety in terms of scale and media outputs. So Gabrielle's work, project Sweating Details, Gabrielle's thesis prep had actually received the Rosemary Grimshaw Award for thesis proposal, where he went and explored various architectural details through embodied set of experiences of those who actually built that architecture. So he was actually prioritizing the physical, mental, and financial longevity of builders from Orange, New Jersey. And these builders, as you can see, are professional construction workers who've shaped his own understanding of the built environment. And that comes to materialize itself down to the detail. So maybe a few construction details that would otherwise abstract the body of the labor at the cost of actually long-term medical consequences might be averted through a kind of an architectural exploration, including the kind of various facilities and spaces of convening where these workers might come together. A second project is Sloane's project. It's titled Green Herrings in a Yellow Room. So it's literally a theatrical table reading that begins to unfabulate, kind of propose an alternative reading of a classical book titled The Yellow Wallpaper, a 1982 foundational feminist short story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And that begins to reimagine Charlotte's actual bedroom, not as yellow, maybe, but as green, a rich and vibrant green that is laced with arsenic, a toxic pigment that was invented in the late 18th century and which induces a series of bodily ailments, mental instability, and even death when used in textiles such as the interior wallpaper. So kind of in a change on the format of a typical review, the various guests were invited to sit around the table, read various parts of that script, and kind of interact with a series of material artifacts here presented as media for that exploration. And maybe a third example, just for the purpose of elucidating, so kind of from the who builds your architecture to various media prototypes and performances to the work that Jidula, his project Ending Well, which you could read as architecture's relationship to landscape, but also kind of a relationship to design build. It's a thesis that proposes reorienting architectural practice relation to land away from a monocultural extractivist instrument and towards a plural valuing of land and its constituent spirits. The site begins with a story in which Jidula in 2022 acquired a 99-year lease for a 6-acre of land in Ghana on a hill cluster in the birthplace of the cocoa industry there. And then in July 2024, before the semester of his thesis, Jidula led the convocation of these farmers, which resulted in a 7-foot expansion of the path and an engagement with the seasonal spirit stream that crosses it. So in relationship to that, his thesis here at MIT explored a series of 5 architectural meditations, mediations, and moments, some around a tree that is called Avia, which common name is the African boundary plan because its most visible use is as a living fence along people's residence. But then the relationship between that tree and architecture and the various other productive uses of the land were some of Jidula's exploration. So you can discover this and many more of our alums' fabulous work on the issue page or on MIT's DSpace, which is a fabulous repository of all theses that were produced here. And I think what is important to matter is that beyond the specifics of the subject matter, it's a way of beginning to craft a sense of an architectural practice that you identify with and then foresee potentially as something that you would like to pursue in the world after that. Thank you.
So this will conclude the SMArchS orientation session. Please bring all of your questions to the lunch session. or where we will all be hanging out. We're out of time for this session, so we'll now move on to the SMArchS orientation.
To ask questions at the end. I'm Anna Miljacki, Director of the SMArchS program, as well as of SMArchS Architectural Design. And I want to take you through a little journey through the SMArchS program and various aspects of MIT that it touches and forms. So you might have seen this. You might have seen this quote. I often expect Nicholas will bring it up, but it's a quote from the founder of the MIT Architecture School. And in conceiving the first school of architecture in the United States, architect William Ware pledged MIT to a very important task of producing architecture and architects worthy of the future. Now, future is always part of an architect's prospective task. It is constitutive of architectural thinking, as you know, and it has been summoned repeatedly throughout history as the framework and the topic of hallucinating, as well as willing new worlds near and far beyond the present. More importantly, Ware's qualifier binds architecture and future through qualitative judgment, inviting us to contemplate futures worth living, architectures worthy of those futures, and the criteria for evaluating them. So in broad strokes, the Master of Science in Architecture Studies is a 2-year program of advanced study founded on research and inquiry in architecture as a discipline and as a practice. The program is intended both for students who already have a professional degree in architecture and those interested in advanced non-professional graduate study, but with different emphasis on these two ends of the spectrum in different discipline groups, depending on where you're entering. It prepares students for careers in research, design, teaching, as well as practice. And here you're seeing just a snippet of last year's SMArchS thesis prep in architectural design. We like to think of the SMArchS program as a laboratory or as multiple laboratories in which we speculate on diverse forms of agency for future architectures. So future is not a singular construct. And in my mind, at least the most useful contemporary conception of future may be as a series of increasingly dire prospects marching towards us, all collateral outcomes of the naive faith of previous eras in unfettered progress. These include major migrations induced by climate change and patterns of global economy, extreme weather, resource depletion, uneven and unjust distribution of economic means, crumbling infrastructure, pollution, AI, and so many other forms of alienation. Turning these prospects into opportunities or ensuring better prospects for all requires many types of architectural projects of different temperaments and temporalities. And this is where the SMArchS program, with its different disciplinary and epistemological frameworks and outcomes, comes in. So together, MIT faculty, guest critics, and students cultivate expertise, sensibilities, and critical questioning necessary to deliver architectural objects with specific effects, architecture as an active participant in the production of urban fabric and material culture, understanding and shaping of political and environmental territories, architecture as the agent of industry's transformation, as a means to address largest societal questions, to critically intervene in discourse, to induce hesitation in various practices of daily life, and rewire the patterns of both understanding and living. T, or technology, which is given primacy in the name of the institute that houses us, is simply a fact of life in all of these architectural domains. It helps solve problems as often as it creates them. But our historical understanding and experience of this at MIT sets us up with an enormous advantage in the contemporary landscape of architectural academia. Everything is already technological, always already technological. As researchers, authors, and producers, MIT faculty work on the edges where the present turns into the future. As pedagogues, we embrace the future by trusting our students, whose thinking and sensibilities will by definition defy the standards of the present, perhaps most notably in the SMArchS program. We currently have 50 SMArchS students across 2 years of the program, and you're seeing here the kind of the breakdown of US permanent resident and international, and the number of students that are in each discipline group at the moment. And for funding, this year we finally arrived at 100% tuition, and that's a great thing. I used to say we're hoping to, but now here we are. It might be useful to distinguish the logic of the SMArchS program from our professional SMArchS program and most other professional and post-professional programs. While all discipline groups contribute to and intersect with the SMArchS program in order to indeed constitute its curriculum, in the SMArchS program, or for the degree in the Master of Science in Architectural Studies, which is called the same for all of our discipline groups, each discipline group provides the pedagogical research framework and guidance and ensures the depth of research and inquiry. But then once you're doing your thesis, though they'll be located in specific discipline groups, they will also often require a kind of braiding of different discipline groups together and expertise from different corners of MIT to actually support you in your project. Let me introduce you to all of the different, so you've now seen these discipline groups and you know that they exist because you applied to specific ones. But here are the people who are in charge of them at the moment. I'm in charge of SMArchS AD. Rania Gossen, who you've seen speak in the SMArch panel, is in charge of SMArchS Urbanism. Caitlin Mueller, SMArchS BT. Larry Sass, SMArchS Computation. Arindam Datta, SMArchS HTC, and Nasir Rabat, SMArchS ACPIA. And together with Skylar Tibbetts, we constitute the SMArchS Curriculum Committee. Skylar is here to help support a portion of this conversation, but also as a key faculty who intersects with all of you in your first semester. So I won't go into great depth on this curriculum, but each discipline group has 3 to 6 required classes, which include thesis prep and thesis. The colloquium I just mentioned is something that everyone has at the beginning. Every discipline group has a version of a methods class, and then also, which will help sort of ground the work in the discipline and in your thesis. Urbanism is currently the group that has studio, and studio is optional for all other groups. Every once in a while, there's someone who decides that a particular studio offered through the SMArch is of interest to their topic and takes it. More often, though, you are engaged as TAs in our SMArch studios, and here is an image from just the trip that I just took with students to Belgrade, Serbia, where Celia Shosabel was our TA. Or, for example, students, Mexico Studio, Spoon Studio last year, where also TAs are from the SMArchS cohort, or trip to Amazon, again, with a studio. But on top of TA ships, this is your cue.
Okay, I can talk about a few things. This is my lab, the self-assembly lab. And one major component of the SMArchS program is often students are connected into labs doing research assistant positions, so RAs. So that's an opportunity. It doesn't have to be my lab, but lots of faculty have labs across our department and even across the rest of the institute. And so you can then work in those labs, get paid, get tuition if you need it, and you get experience working in different projects, different research groups. But that is one key thing about the SMArchS program is really research focused. And so you'll get a chance to work with faculty, work on your own research, work on research with them. Another thing I'll talk about quickly is the colloquium. Yeah, so the colloquium is the first class that all SMArchS students take. I teach that class in the fall, so it'll be the first fall of your first year. All discipline groups come together. And in the beginning, you present to each other, so you get to know each other. Then we invite the second years and the PhDs to come present to you. So then you get to know all of the cohort, the second year and PhD cohort, what is all the research happening in the department. But we also invite one faculty member each week. So then you get to know faculty from across the discipline. You get to be introduced to our department, and eventually you then would know, who do I want to go to talk about this topic, or who can I talk to about my thesis, et cetera. One last fact, I came here as a SMArchS student originally, so 17 years ago. I know the program really well. Happy to talk about that and give advice, et cetera.
Thank you, Skylar. We have also been looking for opportunities to socialize as a cohort, because we don't have the studio as a trench, which you might have been used to in other contexts. We have to invent other ways of doing that, and we've been trying to work on it. I'm going to talk about the kind of maybe stress, illustrate, celebrate the diversity of research in a large arc across the program. But I've also invited representatives from each discipline group to actually tell us about the work that they're doing, so that you can hear about it from former students and current students in their thesis. And then we can have a bit of a discussion if we have time. Hopefully we are not as stretched as the MArch presentation. So everyone, here's a presentation of a project. This was a SMArchS AD student currently working in Chicago and teaching at the University of Illinois, Chicago, or Illinois Urbana-Champaign, sorry. So all SMArchS students work with 2 to 3 committee members on their final projects. The idea is that within that 2 to 3, you have some room to bring someone who's also outside of MIT or is particularly important for your research topic. The keywords that we use to describe the SMArchS activity, research, and inquiry, as you will see in the student work that will follow, take different forms and formats, different methodologies and epistemic frameworks, as I said, that correspond to different definitions of research in the discipline groups that you are occupying. So here, the question was a kind of transmission of patterns or historical thinking in architecture, but also quite literally of patterns. Or, for example, another AD project that was looking at, during the pandemic, it took a form of a film or a set of films, but it was looking at old self-built books in Mexico while considering the real constraints of that moment in that context. What does it mean to get money? Who do you get money from, and how do you construct in Mexico? It was done by Rodrigo Escadon Cesarman, who already when he started his SMArchS was a partner in the Mexico City firm Apre de Lespe. You might have heard of it. He also was a curator of the Mexico Pavilion at the last Venice Architecture Biennale. Or, for example, another project in SMArchS AD that involved concrete printing, including its aesthetic effects and glitches. Zach had a fellowship at Michigan immediately after MIT. So I'm trying to just give you a kind of trajectory from the SMArchS. Mariana Gonzalez was looking at spaces of teaching that are sort of under the radar. She is currently also teaching at Texas Tech in Huckabee. Or Zach was interested in the relationship between the bodily and the digital. He came from RISD with this interest already, and he has been teaching in New York and at Princeton while continuing some of this research. Urban projects tend to focus on the development of critical urban design, as well as its history and theory. And here you're seeing a small excerpt from Gabriel Kozlowski, who is currently doing his PhD at the GSD at Harvard, while also helping put together the big Biennale that's about to open in Venice. He was also a curator of the Brazilian Pavilion in Venice and SMArchS's associate in the last or two Biennales ago. Or here is someone looking at oil or soil and oil in Amazonia. Someone else looking at extraction in Armenia through a film. Or a question of water, humanizing water. This was a thesis prize runner-up at the time. But sometimes in SMArchS urbanism, there are also more scholarly writing and research that take a shape of a written thesis. For example, this one, the drag hinge from Malcolm Rio, who is currently in his PhD at Columbia. SMArchS BT explores ways to use design and technology to create buildings that contribute to a more humane and environmentally responsible built world. And here you're seeing excerpts from David Costanza's work. He was both an MArch here at MIT and then a SMArchS BT. He is currently on tenure track at Cornell. Some of the theses in SMArchS BT tend to take on measurement, testing, lab work, and produce scientific papers. They propose smarter techniques in building and in order to affect both industry and academia. Mohammed Ismail was both our SMArchS student and then our PhD student here. He is currently teaching at UVA. Kylie is currently a PhD student at MIT, but was also a SMArchS student before that, working on thin shell foundations here, thinking about embodied carbon and its reduction through efficiency and geometry. Skylar, I don't know how it feels to, yeah, way back. But projects in computation examine the varied nature and practice of computation in architectural design and the ways in which design, meaning, intention, and knowledge are constructed through sensing, thinking, and making computationally. This often results in new computational tools, in processes and theories. And here's Skylar, as I said, thinking about self-assembly, now running self-assembly, the self-assembly lab, as well as the undergraduate design program. So things range from work like that, it's thinking geometry and material, to figuring out new forms of human-computer interaction, such that the most intuitive gesturing can find its place in the realm of digital production, the way you see in this project. Some projects result in extremely specific, highly precise proposals like this one for liquid metal printing, which was developed across computation and mechanical engineering. And I'm a sucker for images, so I'm showing you the image, but there's lots of math in this particular thesis as well. And Zane is now in a PhD program at ETH. He spent a few years here in the fellowship, teaching fellowship as well. Most of HTC work takes on historical and theoretical topics in architecture and art, relying on archives and historical narrative, like the recent project on seeding of a specific kind of ownership and architecture into the American dream, and conversely, on the socialist activism among US architects. This project, James's project, James is currently in a PhD at Columbia, but this project already began revising a long-standing notion in the US modernism, or that in the US modernism, there was no ideological baggage at all. Or for example, a project on the history, meaning, and the fate that has befallen memorial parks in Japan. Then I wanted to tell you about also the way in which at some points SMArchS students are also involved in the student-run journal Thresholds. In this particular case, 2 HTC SMArchS students were involved in Thresholds that then, now at least, they both run their respective successful design firms, continue to write and produce exhibitions, and Anne Louis has served significantly as one of the curators for the US Pavilion in Venice in 2018. So this is also sort of HTC SMArchS students who actually continue to practice, but now with a slightly different set of concerns or differently developed concerns. The Aga Khan program for Islamic architecture at MIT focuses on the art and architecture of the Islamic world, with projects that can take the form of design research and interventions, as well as history and theory. And this is a project that presents women in the book of games, or another one that was looking at world building in the 1001 Nights story. At Thesis midterm last spring, we had our first open studio sponsored by the Student Council, and we are about to have another one, as you see here, on Friday. So if you're somehow in the area on Friday, this room will become a happy hour with some of the current work of the thesis students or the SMArchS thesis students. It was a great event because it made public some of that work, and these are some of the excerpts of that work at that moment. And then we can certainly talk more about the way that the kind of SMArchS timeline is imagined. The key thing I want to tell you is that we're trying to align the discipline groups so that there are certain moments by which you all have your advisors, certain moments by which you all have your proposals. And then, of course, the final thesis event is a big deal. And here are some images from last year's thesis event. As I said, every discipline group comes up or has its own logics and formats for producing the work. And so we try to accommodate as best we can the nature of that work and research in the context of, for now, this building. But as you can see, it takes different kinds of conversations or formats of conversation. And then we celebrate with the friends we invited. And now I'm going to give this over to our students, former students. I've invited Ekin Bilal, Nami Kun, Rachel Blows, Nof Nathanson, Tianyi Lee, and Arezo Hakemi to tell you something about their trajectories in SMArchS. Ekin and Nof have both finished their SMArchS already and are here now in different roles, which they will tell you about, whereas others are all in that final stage of thesis, about to show their work in this room at the end of the week. Yeah, deal? So, and maybe we can at least pretend that we're gonna sit and talk if we don't run out of time as we finish. So, Ekin.
Okay. Hi all, I'm Ekin. I finished SMArchS AD last year, and right now I'm here as a teaching fellow. And last semester I taught Core 3 for undergrads, so it was an integrated studio with undergrads and grads. And this semester I'm teaching 2 undergraduate studios, one Foundations and Introduction to Design, the other one is the most advanced undergrad studio that they can take. And briefly, I'm going to talk about my thesis work. So when I came to AD, I had a vague interest in the concept of ellipsis in literature. So something that parts of architecture that feel as incomplete stories. And that very vague interest evolved into kind of an obsession with maintenance spaces down the line. And my thesis took shape as creating a practice called UBU, or Office of Back of House. And this manifested itself by what you're seeing is the poster for call for volunteer observers. And then this is a form I filled out, but essentially it turned into a practice that first did excursions into architecture and cities to understand where maintenance spaces reside, because these spaces are often left out of the architectural canon as being not worthy of analysis, or thought of belonging to the domain of design. So the first idea was to actually go in and then analyze them through pseudoscientific measures. So the forms are not there as kind of measure taking, but also urging designers to engage the space quite physically. As you're seeing, there's and kind of a rubbing that they would have to do, or a door tag they would hang. So suddenly this maintenance spaces were becoming more observable through this measure. And then these analysis or formal submissions that I received turned into representations, which was both operating as a way for me to archive archetypes of back of house spaces or maintenance spaces, render them visible, rethink their representation in architecture. So they're not just in the poche of a M&E plan, but suddenly they become exhumated into the architectural conventions of drawing, which is what you're seeing is frontal obliques and colorful frontal obliques that are pretty forefront of the zeitgeist of architectural representation today. And then also identifying elements that are not necessarily just pipes, ducts, custodial carts, but identifying hiding elements like a Gatorade bottle that actually signals this maintenance space was used for taking breaks, and other mini stories that hide in these spaces that change our perception of architecture proper. And finally, this manifested as multiple projects that Office would utilize this analysis as a departure point. And the observation was that that allowed me to create a framework was realizing these maintenance spaces are ruled by hidden regime of regulations, zoning rules, and paper trail, essentially, that often, again, is not the hottest topic in architecture, possibly, but became a very fascinating point of departure for me creatively. And what it meant is, for example, at times it wasn't only analysis. This one was observing an existing funding initiative in Massachusetts where there was a prioritization of abandoned buildings that were in disrepair and almost collapsing, and rethinking why this funding initiative exists as such, instead of intervening when the house is actually foreclosed and no longer is receiving maintenance, waiting until it is in disrepair so that a heroic saving narrative is much more prioritized through funding initiatives. So it was both a way to gain insight into what are political and economical narratives that dictate our ideas of maintenance and repair, but then also thinking about what kind of loopholes might exist within these regulations and paper trail. This proposal took shape as maintenance and what I call a heat solidarity unit, which would connect two houses, one foreclosed, no longer receiving maintenance, through heat systems, which is the biggest reason that houses start falling apart rapidly when moisture leaks in through cracks and burst pipes. And by establishing what I call a heat solidarity between an occupied house, waste heat that is coming pumped out from the vents, and connecting it into an unoccupied building, we can hold the temperature around 55 Fahrenheit, which allows the material decay to occur much more slowly, so that you don't dump in governmental funds to create a heroic save. You don't have a before and after picture, but a resilient community that no longer is preyed upon by real estate flipping. And this is what I call this project Puffler resulted in. And there were 3 other projects as a part of the thesis, which I won't go into in depth today. And I just briefly wanted to mention a couple of very valuable things that were kind of getting me to think about this thesis project. The first one was I was kind of obsessed with animation, and at SMArchS AD, I had the time, because of the way that the curriculum is set up, you can really go into different departments and kind of build your skill set that is not necessarily always a part of architectural education. So here I learned how to make animation. So this was an installation photo of an animation that was about just like a kind of a banal architectural stoop, and then thinking about it as a transtemporal agent and collecting of narratives. And the other one was a comic book class that I took, where I was kind of going and finding elements that traverse the back of house, which kind of turned into my office later on, and the front of house, like a lunch tray in a cafeteria, where the object is the only thing that is expected to traverse this boundary that is kind of prohibitive in a social sense and architectural sense, but through an object that traverses these can collect different narratives of maintenance and use. Yeah. Yep.
Hi, my name is Nami, and I'm currently in SMArchS Urbanism and working on my thesis called Purified Soul, Bodies, and Crematoriums. I just wanted to give you a glimpse of what I'm currently working on and see how SMArchS Urbanism thesis can pan out. So every year, over 70,000 people die in Seoul, and yet they're within the sprawling metropolis. There are only 2 operating crematoriums, which means that each institution must process over 100 bodies per day, a task that is both very mechanical and deeply human. My thesis really started off when I visited for my grandfather cremation, and I remember the process was efficient, seamless, and yet very unsettling. Body disappeared into a flame, and what remained was not just an ash, but a lingering question of what does it mean to be absent? Absence in this context is not simply the loss of loved one. It's a spatial and phenomenological condition, something that shapes both personal grief and the urban urban landscape. My thesis will be a short film which presents this absence as a dialogue between bodies and architecture. It unfolds in a triptych across 3 parallel timelines, each corresponding to 3 mandatory days of mourning. Through this structure, the film reflects on 3 perspectives: the bereaved, the deceased, and the workers. These institutions are no longer sites of mourning, but systems of control. In post-war Korea, rapid modernization prioritized efficiency over tradition, stripping the cremation process of its historical, material, and communal significance. The architecture of crematorium reflects this shift, where grief is processed as quickly as bodies, and where continuity is replaced by severance. This detachment does not simply mark a transition from past to present. Instead, it creates a cultural desynchronization, where modernization has left grief in an unresolved state. In this film, it expresses different through something I call sensory desynchronization, which refers phenomenon where the perceived sense of person is constantly mismatched with intention of the space that has been designed for. I explore not only through architectural scale, but how this desynchronization has created greater urban repercussion, leading to a larger population shrinkage. Traditional ritual once bound personal mourning to communal memory, but today that connection is fading. The crematorium as a physical and institutional space does not just mark the end of life. It breaks the family ties and traditions. So what remains is the generational melancholy, where grief is neither fully severed nor meaningfully preserved. My thesis is attempt to capture this tension in film, the friction between an engineered present and inherent past, revealing how the modern crematorium reshapes our relationship with death, urban landscape, and memory. Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Rachel. I'm a current SMArchS BT student, and I'll be continuing on in the PhD, so hopefully I'll get to know some of you next year. I work with Caitlin Mueller in the Digital Structures Lab, and I came to BT with a background in architecture and structural engineering and sort of a general interest in reuse, but not really any specific plans for how I was going to pursue that in research. So today I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about how my thesis has evolved in my time here, but also about how the process sort of developed from that interest. So my thesis is generally about developing mass timber from waste lumber offcuts. And this was really motivated by an interest in irregular waste materials. So I wanted to pursue research that somehow both addressed embodied carbon in structural materials, and reuse is a great strategy to do that, but also that addressed the massive amounts of C&D waste that we generate in conventional building strategies. And so I was sort of motivated by these 2 questions of how can irregular inventories of salvaged materials be used to create functional building components, and can the design of these components actually benefit from the heterogeneity of these inventories? In the process, I started to look more at wood design and the way that we design with wood generally. And so that's actually a really good reference point when we're thinking about designing with irregular building materials, because wood is naturally highly irregular. So these are some photos from a trip that I got to do last year with Odds and Mods, which is a program here that looks specifically at these questions. And so I went to California and I got to look at the whole sort of manufacturing process from forest to lumber production for how we sort of grade and standardize lumber typically in design. And then I also got to learn more about engineered wood products, which are another approach that we use to generally make structural components that are sort of highly replicable, where we know a lot about their design properties, but based on these irregular materials. During my time here, I also got to take some really interesting courses like Caitlin's class in optimization, where I learned about these sort of conventional approaches to reducing embodied carbon that are actually not that widely practiced. And so I wanted to incorporate these into my thesis as well. So some of these strategies include, structural optimization or shape optimization that allows us to use less material to begin with, using low carbon materials like wood. So I wanted to focus on an all wood construction assembly. designing for reuse in different ways. And interestingly, a couple of people in my lab have worked on past projects that have looked at inventory matching techniques, which are algorithms that allow us to assign irregular inventories of materials as efficiently as possible to designs. And that led to sort of where I am in my thesis now. So here we're looking at a dowel laminated timber slab system, which is basically composed of all of these waste lumber offcuts that you might find on a construction site or that you might find coming from a mass timber manufacturing process typically. And the idea is to sort of combine them together with a dowel laminated timber or dowel lamination system. So it's all wood, there's no glue, there's no metal in the process. And we're using processes like inventory matching to take these sorts of sets of irregular components and allocate them as efficiently as possible in the slab design. And we're also using structural optimization, so you can see that it's deeper in the middle there. And so that's basically responding to structural needs where you'd have your highest bending moment, for instance. And so through this process, I've been able to sort of work through structural questions more broadly, but also think about broader questions of circularity, how we would go from production in a typical architectural process into these more automated, structurally sensitive developments in design components. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Video. Wait. Oh, okay. Play. How do I? Okay.
Do you wanna?
Where is it now? Okay. So this is a video.
But does it have a link?
No, it was in the Google slide as a video.
Oh, but I took it out of Google Slides.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't you? Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to bring my laptop? Okay. Yeah.
Tian. You can come. You can go. Oh, why? What's going on? Yeah, we'll do. There it is. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, hello all. My name's Tian Yi, and I'm a SMArchS HTC student. Like presumably many of you, I graduated from architecture school. Do you need? Okay. And then now I'm training as a historian, specializing in the history of design and its economies in modern China. So I've been asked to tell you a little bit about my thesis project, which concerns diary writing in China between the years 1918 and 1962. And they really started when I encountered these objects at the Feng Library at Harvard about 1 year ago. So these are diaries by rank and file government officials from the 1950s. And I really, after writing several papers about them, couldn't really draw very substantial conclusions from them because I really didn't know who were writing these diaries, why they were writing them, the limitations and the promises as well of these as historical sources. And so I decided to focus my thesis on them. So just to give you a little bit of what the thesis is about, in the process of figuring, in the process of tackling this very particular question and in developing my grounding knowledge in Chinese history as an aspirant historian, I found all these sources. So in terms of the chapters, the chapter 1 argues that in starting from 1918 through 1923, diaries became a super popular thing that was published and read in China. And like this publishing houses and the institutions and individuals involved in the book trade in Republican China of that period, published translated diaries. Intellectuals published their own diaries. They republished and edited diaries from the imperial era, and they produced like fictional diaries. And then it was this very flourishing, vibrant trade that was unfolding during that moment. And that spurred some of the literary avant-garde to publish contributions in literary magazines that theorized about the diary as a particularly emancipatory confessional genre. And so this was really attractive to educators because, as I argue in chapter 2, they were in the process of cultivating citizenship for a nascent republic. They wanted to cultivate independent thinking and active political participation and self-expression. And this led them to write a lot of textbooks for diary writing. And ironically, in the process of producing these textbooks that sought for a normative way of diary writing, this genre that was originally touted for its emancipatory effects became highly regimented. And this included not only literary prescriptions on structure and style, but also on how diarists should comport themselves as, modern citizens and modern individuals. And so this was really interesting because then we can return to the diaries themselves. These are diaries published from the 1930s, 1936, 1946, 1952, and like back to like the 1950s diaries that I had originally found at Harvard. And to understand them as a reaction or to understand that they were produced in the context of highly stringent ethical prescriptions and debates allows us to ask much more granular questions about how ethics were understood and played out in like China during this period. We can ask like, we talk about ethics as they were prescribed from above, but like how were they understood or inflected or modulated, practiced, resisted, or complied at the bottom? So that's the question that chapter 3 concludes by examining. So if some of you are like, this has nothing to do with design or architecture at all, I don't care. If I may just suggest like 2 takeaways, I think it really illustrates the flexibility of the research agendas. Like the faculty here are really supportive of my own intellectual pursuits, and I think that's worth flagging. And secondly, I think as like this extended source analysis, it also illustrates the theoretical and historical rigor of the program at MIT that I think I knew, but I would have appreciated someone telling me as explicitly back then. And so, yeah, thank you, that's it.
Yeah, so okay. Okay, so I'm Nof. I'm now a PhD computation student, and I did my SMArchS here. I joined in 2018 and graduated in 2020. So when I got to MIT, I had some interest in digital fabrication. But when I got to MIT, I had the opportunity to actually do actual work in digital fabrication with a community that I was engaged with. So in my thesis, and it was 5 years ago, so I'll try to explain it as it was now. But I worked with a community, a Bedouin community in a village called Al Araqib in the desert in Israel. This village is maybe the most temporary village in the world. Since they live in they have obviously conflicts with the state of Israel. And every 30 days, the police come and demolish the whole village. And it's going back to this, like this happening already from 2010. So I had some previous collaborations with this community. But then coming to MIT, I had the opportunity to start a workshop with the community with the help of MIT funding. So one of the greatest thing about MIT is all the opportunities to actually get funding for your project. I applied for MISTI, it's the international initiative. I don't know the rest of the, but it's MISTI has a branch for each country that you can apply for getting funding to do something in another country. So during the summer between the 2 years of SMArchS, I led a workshop for MIT graduate students. And we went to this village and worked with the community. We brought a tiny CNC machine with us from MIT to there. And we worked with the community about designing and building 8 minutes, 10 minutes house, a house that you can assemble and disassemble in 10 minutes. And this project was part of my thesis later. So we built this house, and later on, my thesis actually was set of tools, of digital tools, to give a presence to this village that is not always exist on ground. So in this photo, you can see a tiny solar-powered camera I designed to live stream the demolitions in the village. So maybe another thing that was really important for me, that was really shaped a lot of what I did later. I took a class that called How to Make Almost Anything. That is like a more precise description will be how to Google everything, I guess. How to, because it's like it's open your mind to a lot of technologies that are out there, and then you need to learn by yourself how to use them, how to make stuff. So in the first time in my life, I did electronics and networking and soldering and all kinds of things that I didn't know, that helped me build these tools for my thesis. Later on, it had a live stream of the demolitions, an interactive map, kind of an open source set of tools for the community to rebuild their houses. And the idea was that the files are on the cloud and can be reproduced over and over again. Even if the police demolish the village. I wanted to talk about 2 other experiences, or I think that were really meaningful for me in during SMArchS. So the first thing was that right when I started working at the self-assembly lab as a research assistant. And this really, I think, changed my perspective about what I want to do. Because when I got here, I was sure I'm gonna go back to practice right after SMArchS. And at MIT, I, for the first time, was part of this like research institute, doing design research and learning all kinds of new stuff that are in the architectural discourse, but not necessarily buildings or traditional buildings. And that really opened my mind to this idea that I want to continue doing research, and that's why I'm here now doing a PhD. So this was a strong experience for me, and I really recommend you to explore this opportunity to work as research assistants. And another photo I included here was from the Agit Art workshop that Anna led when I was like first year SMArchS. That was really, I think, I mean, it was in some degree my interest, but it wasn't like a computational thing, right? Probably I was the only computation student there. But it really opened my mind to this like interdisciplinary environment at MIT, and that you can do projects. Like my thesis is not only was about computational tools, but also about community engagement and work of like social work. So that's another thing I recommend you to open your mind to other disciplines, groups, professors.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me stop share.
I think we're actually out of time, but so we're just sitting here for a second. But those of you who have breakout groups now, please, get I have a little more content to ask questions that are hopefully going to be relevant for your decisions. Maybe if there's some SMArchS or even can you go to this? Can you go to this? Yeah.
This one?
Yes.
Full screen from here?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Got enough mic.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Arzo, a second-year SMArchS student in the Algacon program for Islamic architecture, currently working on my thesis. I'll really quickly talk about my experience here and then how that has like really influenced me getting to my thesis topic. I came in here not really knowing clearly exactly what I wanted to research, but I knew I wanted to work on either like the architecture or art of Afghanistan and Greater Central Asia. And I took a couple of different classes. I took Professor Rania Ghazen's SMArchS Urbanism Pro Seminar, which was not required for me, but I thought it was an interesting class to take to learn about research and maybe methods of that. And then I took a class in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning that had some funding to go travel to a World Heritage Site, and I was able to go to Bukhara with that funding. And then I'll talk a little bit more about another class that I took last semester with Huma Gupta on archive fever. So my thesis currently talks about, or it's looking at Afghan war rugs and how to read them as placemaking devices, as artifacts, as maps, really. I'm really looking at the icons and motifs, the borders, looking at them through a cartographic perspective and representational perspective, maybe thinking through the agency of the weaver and the design of the rugs, rather than what they have kind of become as souvenir objects today. My focus is on the rugs that were produced between 1979 and 89 in Afghanistan during the Soviet invasion. And these are kind of the early rugs that prompt a lot of questions about how these rugs came to be and what the perception of them are today. So here I'm looking at a collection of rugs in the British Museum and trying to analyze them and understand their perspectives on cities, on place, on the landscape of Afghanistan, really. The class I took with Professor Huma Gupta on archiving led us to go to DC to the National Archives, and we got to look at materials there that prompted more questions and inspirations on looking at these carpets or rugs very materially and looking at them as archives and holding them as things of memory, objects of memory.
So yeah, really quickly to just wrap up, I'm fascinated by the work that's been done here and fascinated by the work of my colleagues. And I think it's a really exciting place and opportunity to talk to other people, not just like the professors here, but also the people you're working with and students here. So thank you.